Hello. What's up, everyone? Well, my name is Jason Silva. It's very nice to be here with you guys. And just to give you a little background on who I am. So I'm a filmmaker. I'm a media artist. Spent the last couple of years hosting a television show for Al Gore's TV network, Current TV, which pioneered the use of short-form content on mainstream television when they launched in end of 2004, 2005. And so I fell in love with the power of short-form content to tell a story. And I'm one of those people that kind of has a love affair with the philosophical implications of our human technology coevolution. I relate a lot to the ideas of Timothy Leary and Marshall McLuhan when they used to say that the computer is the LSD of the 80s and 90s, that technology is mind expanding, that technology extends our reach. There's a great book by a cognitive philosopher called Andy Clark, and it's called Natural Born Cyborgs. And one of the fascinating ideas that he mentions in his book is he says we need to get over our skin bag bias, and that we need to start thinking of our tools as outsourced cognition. He says technology is our exoskeleton. Technology is like a scaffolding that extends our thought, our reach, and our vision. And one of the things that we see happening nowadays is that increasingly powerful technologies are shrinking the buffer time between what we think about and what we can create in the world. What we dream about and what we can create is happening faster and faster and faster. Now, so technology, because it's a scaffolding that extends our reach, you can extend our reach in any direction. Perhaps the greatest information technology is the alphabet. And the alphabet, can help us create Shakespearean sonnets that inspire and enrich our inner world, or the alphabet can be used to compose hate speech. So technology has always been a double-edged sword. It can extend our power in any direction. And I'm interested in putting out there optimistic messages of how technology can extend our reach in positive ways. Now, one of the fundamental notions that I try to put out there is to get people to think exponentially instead of linearly. My friend Peter Diamandis, who founded the X Prize Foundation and Singularity University, says, our brains evolved in a world that was linear and local, but now we live in a world that is global and exponential, and our brains are having issues catching up to what that means. And of course, the famous example that Ray Kurzweil uses to illustrate exponential growth is he says, look at your average smartphone, which is 1 million times cheaper, 1 million times smaller, and 1,000 times more powerful than a $60 million supercomputer was that was half a building in size 40 years ago. So when you see that rate of progress, when you see something that costs $200, that a young person in Africa today with a smartphone has better communications technology than the US president had 25 years ago, you start to see the impact of these exponential technologies and how they can improve our lives. Bill Clinton's recent article in Time magazine that he wrote in time for his global initiative a couple weeks back, it was about the smartphone. And he said, forget the info haves and the info nots. Phones equal freedom. And he cited a 2010 United Nations study that said that one of the greatest inventions in history to pull people out of poverty was the cell phone. And of course, this is just one example, but absolutely is true. So a year ago, I started creating a series of short videos that I call Shots of Philosophical Espresso that aim to distill ideas related to exponential growth curves of technology, ideas related to imagination, to inspiration, and to distill them into these 2-minute shots of, again, philosophical espresso that are meant to pull people out of context in a really dramatic manner and force them to nudge in amazement at the ubiquitous everyday wonders that we're culturally disposed to ignore, because anything that's always around becomes invisible and we assimilate to the wonders that we live in and we stop noticing them. So these videos have kind of gone viral. They're non-commercial. They're meant to be mashups to kind of invigorate the intellect and make you see technology in a new way. But they have kind of taken off in the sense that I've been invited to all these conferences to showcase these videos. And this one I'm going to show you I actually created for the TED Global Conference, and it's called Radical Openness, and it takes a look at the notion that ideas are living things that replicate and spread from meme to meme, and that we have left biological evolution and entered the age of cultural evolution. So let me show you the first video that kind of put you in the certain mind setting that I'd like you guys to be in, and then we'll go from there. So let's just do the first video.
You know, I love this idea of radical openness, the free exchange of information, the free flow of ideas, creating spaces in which ideas can have sex, as Matt Ridley talks about. And this is huge because it turns out that ideas are just as real as the neurons they inhabit, as James Gleick tells us. You know, a new kingdom rises above the biosphere. Denizens of this kingdom are ideas, because ideas have retained some of the properties of organisms, it turns out. They leap from brain to brain. They compete for the limited resources of our attention. They have infectivity. They have spreading power. They are what Richard Dawkins calls the new replicators, born from the primordial soup of human culture. Their vector of transmission is language and electronic communications. And though ideas are not made of nucleic acid, they have achieved more evolutionary change, and at a rate that leaves the old gene panting far behind. You know, Ray Kurzweil says our ability to create virtual models in our heads, combined with our modest-looking thumbs, was sufficient to usher in a secondary force of evolution called technology. And it will continue until the entire universe is at our fingertips. This is unbelievable stuff. It speaks to the telescopic nature of evolutionary change. More change in the last 100 years than in the last billion years. Terence McKenna actually wrote that from the moment that human beings invented language, biological evolution essentially ceased, and evolution became a cultural epigenetic phenomenon. Now, we take in matter of low organization, we put it through our mental filters, and we extrude it in the form of space shuttles and iPhones. You know, the imaginary foundation tells us that what imagination does is it allows us to conceive of delightful future possibilities, pick the most amazing one, and pull the present forward to meet it. You know, imagine how impoverished this world would have been if we hadn't invented the technology of the oil painting in time for Van Gogh, or the technology of the musical instrument in time for Beethoven and Mozart to unfurl through it. You know, with the revolutions in biotechnology, nanotechnology, the free exchange of information is allowing us to conceive of radical new things. Freeman Dyson says in the future, new generation of artists will be writing genomes with the fluency that Blake and Byron wrote verses. What is great in man, said Nietzsche, is that he is a bridge and not an end. You know, we're on a trajectory smack in the middle between the born and the made, wrote Kevin Kelly. And so radical openness, it's huge. It's a universe of possibility. It's gray infused by color. It's the invisible revealed. It's the mundane blown away by awe. We need to cultivate radical openness as a way of participating and accelerating evolution. Wow.
So you can see they're kind of like these hypomanic focused. I don't know if you guys read the book, The Hypomanic Edge, but it talks about this notion of being just crazy enough to be able to channel these moments of intense inspiration, these hypomanic moments where we feel like we connect the dots in a new way, and we have this sort of intense exercise of pattern recognition and see how all the dots connect. And these ecstatic visions tend to be so fleeting and so impermanent. And I think the challenge of any artist or entrepreneur or creative is to sort of translate that impermanent ecstatic vision into something permanent, you know, whether it's in paint or in song or in a mathematical algorithm or in a film or video. And so, you know, the reason I call my talk The Creating and Sharing of Awe is because I think that experiences of awe, invigorating intellectual ahas, are kind of like antidotes to existential despair, you know. Ernest Becker wrote a 1974 Pulitzer Prize-winning book called The Denial of Death, where he defines the human condition as that of death anxiety. The human condition is defined by our anxiety about the fact that we are mortal beings. He calls us gods with anuses. And we've come up with these solutions, these illusions to transcend our anxiety about dying. And of course, the first one is the religious solution, which gets rid of the death problem by promising us an afterlife. The second one is the romantic solution, where we turn our lovers into deities, and they are our salvation. She's like the wind, she's like the sun. Every pop song will explain that. And then the last solution to the problem of death, he calls the creative solution, and that's what will sort of give us some kind of symbolic immortality. That's what will outlive our fleeting, impermanent blink of an eye in which we're here. And the creative solution to the problem of death, of course, is exemplified by our technology, by the way that we use our tools to transcend our boundaries, to expand our sphere of possibility. And so when you see the progress of exponential growth of these technologies, when you consider the rate of change at which this is happening, shrinking the space between what we dream about and what we can realize in the world, you see that the creative solution to the problem of death is perhaps our most heroic undertaking as a species. We are the species that didn't stay in the caves. We haven't stayed on the planet. Pretty soon we won't stay with the limitations of our biology. One of the three overlapping revolutions that
the example of the three overlapping revolutions, of course, that are leading us towards what Ray Kurzweil calls the technological singularity are the overlapping revolutions of information technology, AI, potentially transcending human intelligence in a non-biological substrate. Of course, biotechnology, which is mastering the information processes of biology. What happens when we master life code, when we translate DNA into code that we can manipulate? Then we upgrade ourselves. Then you have software that can write its own hardware. What's it going to be like when a new generation of artists and poets are writing with the genome, are writing with life code? What kind of new artistry are we going to make? I mean, just like I cited the example in the video of Kevin Kelly's where he says how impoverished the world would have been if we hadn't invented language in time for, Shakespeare, if we hadn't invented the oil painting technology in time for, all these beautiful painters, if we hadn't invented the technology of music in time for Beethoven and Mozart. What new kinds of technologies will serve as new instruments for unimagined forms of human expression and human possibility? This is the kind of stuff that really turns me on. And then, of course, nanotechnology, when matter itself becomes a programmable medium. I mean, the idea of this, it shakes us out of our existential stupor. It gets rid of any notions that we live in a world defined by banality. In fact, we live in a world defined by possibility. I think it was Coleridge channeling Wordsworth, or maybe the other way around, where they talk about the challenge is to awaken the mind's attention from the lethargy of custom and the film of familiarity and redirecting it instead to the wonders of existence. And I think for me, it's just kind of a necessary vitamin for my soul. Like I need to kind of direct my attention towards that which is most inspiring and that which is most mind-boggling. It's like Timothy Leary used to say, in order to use our heads, we've got to go out of our minds. We have to step out of our comfort zones. We have to decondition our thinking. We have to radically alter our perspectives from time to time so that we can see the world in a new way. The next video that I want to show you was inspired by David Deutsch's new book, The Beginning of Infinity. If you haven't checked it out, it's really out there and I recommend it. There was a New York Times review of the book that was saying, in order to get into the headspace of where this guy is at, this is a fellow human being, but look at where his head is at. He talks about, well, you know what, let me show you the video first and then we'll get into the example. But this is the ultimate kind of example of mind over matter, not in the New Age bumper sticker kind of way, but in the very literal way defined by technology and the way we have transformed the world. So here's the beginning of infinity.
2, 1, 0.
I am very much an optimist. I'm reminded of Rich Doyle's line from Darwin's Pharmacy. He says, dreams do not lack reality. They are real patterns of information. Or when the Imaginary Foundation says that the role of human imagination is to conceive of all these delightful futures, choose the most amazing and exciting and ecstatic possibility, and then pull the present forward to meet it. That is what we do. We bring our imaginings into existence. But I think that as technology has advanced, we have found ways to outsource our mental capacities to our tools so much more. Our ability to manipulate the physical world has increased in an exponential fashion. So we've been able to shrink the lag time between our imaginings and their instantiation in the real world. David Deutsch speaks in his new book, The Beginning of Infinity. He says, if you look at the topography of the island of Manhattan today, that topography is a topography in which the forces of economics and culture and human intent have trumped the forces of geology. I mean, the topography of Manhattan today is no longer shaped by mere geology. It's shaped by the human mind and by economics and by culture. And so what David Deutsch extrapolates is that ultimately that will be the fate of the whole universe. He says gravitation and antimatter might only shape the universe at its earliest and least interesting stages, but eventually the whole entire thing will be subject to the intent of substrate-independent, infinitely more powerful minds. And to conceive of that just, it makes me feel ecstatic.
And it's true. It's pretty crazy, right? The goal of these videos is twofold. I mean, obviously I want to invigorate people. I want to make them think about technology in a different way. Consider the mind as the source of something that can trump geology. I mean, again, the example here from David Deutsch's book is that the topography of Manhattan is shaped more by the decisions of a culture, by the decision of minds, and minds erecting matter than by geology. So why not extrapolate that into the future using the principles of exponential growth? How might we transform not just the rest of the planet, but the universe? I mean, it's totally out there, but the scope of the ideas is so visceral, so intense, that I feel like it would be unfair to the ideas to not communicate them with equal searing intensity. I think one of the problems that the communication of science and technology suffers is that because it tends to stay in the realm of academia, there's a whole swaths of people that don't get to engage with these kinds of ideas. And there's a great line from the Imaginary Foundation. It says, ideas catch the dewdrops and reflect the cosmos, so let them be poetic, let them be noble, let them be beautiful. But I guess for me, I feel like my goal is to widen the audiences that get to engage with these ideas, to give people another way in. I think in the age of the internet, of the age of viral video, making videos that are 2 minutes in length that don't feel entitled to too much of your time, because I know that you have Twitter and you have a million other tabs open and you have Facebook. And so I feel like if you can grab somebody for 2 minutes and ask them for nothing more and trade in the currency of inspiration, which means if this inspires you, maybe you want to post it on your social media feed, maybe you want to share it on Facebook, that's great, because these are non-commercial. They're just meant to invigorate people. I was reading this article about the power of storytelling as a rhetorical device, as like devices that capture and manage attention, and how you need to create a state of immersion or absorption in order for any kind of transpersonal growth or persuasion or entertainment to take place. Now, this is very easy to create in a movie theater where people turn off their phones and they're in a dark room and the screen is larger than life. But how do you do that on the internet? How do you do that with online video where the window is really small, where the speakers on the laptop probably suck, or maybe when people are watching it on their smartphones? There are so many distractions. So how do you capture and manage attention when you have such limited screen real estate? And I think that my answer to that is to make videos that are really psychedelic and really intense, that just kind of force you into paying attention. The next video that I want to show you is probably one of my most popular ones, because it speaks to something that's kind of become really popular right now, is big data. Of course, in most contexts, people talk about big data as a way of how can companies track your likes and your dislikes and your behavior and your movements so that they can then make predictions about what you want to buy. But I think on a deeper level, I think big data offers us a way to gain tremendous amounts of self-insights into what we are. Eric Davis talks about us being reduced to algorithmic cascades. We've never had such ability to measure everything. The more we can measure and the more we can extrapolate meaning from what we can measure, and we can turn all of our behavior, what we like, what we don't like, where we go, what we do, everything that we do, all of a sudden the behavior of free individuals moving through time and space is reduced to particles of information on some visualization that gives us some like instant insight into ourselves or into something. And what we're finding is there's a lot of these patterns that keep like recurring and persisting. Patterns of innovation, how the city is like, the coral reef is like the city of the sea, because the coral reef is the most biologically diverse organism in nature, and then the city is the most idea-rich organism in the man-made world. And you're seeing all these parallels and these patterns, and it can make you feel a little schizo, but I decided to make a video that illustrates the epiphanies, and I call it "To Understand is to Perceive Patterns," which is what we're seeing more and more in the age of big data. So check it out. To understand is to perceive patterns. Now, of course, what this means is that true comprehension comes when the dots are revealed and you get Stephen Johnson's long view and you see the big picture. This is this idea about patterns, recurring patterns across different scales of reality. Paul Stamets talks about the mycelial archetype and how the information sharing systems that comprise the internet look exactly like computer models of dark matter in the universe, look exactly like the neurons in a brain. They all share the same intertwinkle filamental structure. It's the rise of networkism as big data advocates talk about how man-made systems are looking exactly like natural systems. The more we can measure, the more we can visualize, the more it expands our consciousness by seeing these recurring patterns across scales of reality. It blows my mind, and I think that technology increasingly is becoming an expander of human consciousness. It extends our thought, reach, and vision, and revealing so much more. It's like, whereas once I was blind, now I can see. Jeffrey West from the Santa Fe Institute is telling us that cities are really like organisms. Alleys are like capillaries. How is it possible that a man-made artificial technological system is behaving like a natural system? The more efficient it becomes, the more it's starting to look like nature. Really interesting, weird stuff.
But it makes me optimistic. It's like when Stephen Johnson says, look, if we can understand all this stuff, anything becomes possible, right? It's the adjacent possible, standing as a sort of shadow future, a map of all the ways the present can reinvent itself. It's beautiful stuff.
That line by Stephen Johnson, the adjacent possible, is probably, something that I think defines the kind of message that I'm putting out there. The adjacent possible is a shadow future that hovers on the present state of things. So don't look upon the world as it is, look upon the world as what it could turn into. A map of all the ways in which the present can reinvent itself. And there's one of my favorite books that I recommend to everybody is written by this guy called Eric Davis. It's called Technosis. And he's got a wonderful line that describes where he sees technology heading. But basically he says, we live in a universe that's increasingly creating more and more novelty, and now us as complex life forms are putting that to overdrive through the use of creating technology and then engaging in feedback loops with that technology that expands our sphere of possibilities and so on and so forth, creating more and more novelty, networked minds that transcend all previous limits, as Kevin Kelly says. And Eric Davis, the quote I want to share is, he says, eventually in McKenna's scenario, Kevin Kelly's scenario, and Ray Kurzweil's scenario, the wave of novelty that is human history will ultimately reach a tipping point, a singularity. At that point, the human design process, which includes culture, technology, and the manipulation of matter, will achieve a sort of infinite velocity. Everything becomes linked with everything else, or matter becomes mind, or something like that. So of course this is a very poetic description, but for me, if you're not going to explain something in a poetic way, don't bother explaining it almost, because you're not going to reach people. I think the poetry of how you explain an idea is pivotal to inducing that state of awe. And this next video, on a very meta level, the last video I want to show you, is a video that explains awe while trying to induce awe. And the inspiration came from a Stanford study that came out that was saying that experiences that push our perceptual boundaries beyond their limits end up really invigorating us. They remap our mental models of the world. So blowing our own minds does indeed make us nicer people. It leaves us with feelings of psychological well-being, increased empathy and altruism, and all sorts of other psychological benefits. So it kind of validates what I'm trying to do with my videos, pulling the rug from underneath people, shaking them out of their comfort zones. Everything good and great does begin at the edge of our comfort zone. So this last video I want to show you is called The Biological Advantage of Being Awestruck. And it's the last video I made, and it's definitely more subdued than my other ones. It's not as manic, but hopefully it'll get in there. Let's make sure that it's loud enough when it plays.
Eminent psychologist Nicholas Humphrey has written of the biological advantage of being awestruck. How fortuitous, he says, for a species to find that its own ability to contemplate, to marvel at its own existence, has been evolutionarily advantageous. In other words, it has been biologically selected for because it informs our life with a sense of cosmic significance that makes us work harder to persist and to survive. In other words, awe has helped us survive. And a recent study out of Stanford on the subject of awe kind of validates this idea. They have found that regular incidences of awe leave residual benefits upon the individual that persist, such as increased feelings of empathy and compassion towards others, increased feelings of altruism, and increased feelings of general well-being. In this study, they defined awe as an experience of such perceptual expansion, such perceptual vastness, that you literally have to reconfigure, upgrade your mental schemata just to accommodate, just to take in the scale of the experience. This is amazing. We've all felt this before. The first time we stared upon the Grand Canyon or succumbed to the immersive power of an IMAX film. But perhaps the most exquisite account of the experience of awe was articulated by the brilliant Ross Anderson when writing about the Hubble Space Telescope. Pay attention. He says that the Hubble has given us nothing less than an ontological awakening, a forceful reckoning with what is, allowing us to contemplate space and time on a scale just shy of the infinite. Wild. He says gazing upon the famous deep field photograph literally allows us to mainline the whole of time through the optic nerve. To fit something so impossibly large to something so impossibly small. It's incredible. He says through the sheer aesthetic force of its discoveries, the Hubble distills the impossibly complex abstractions of astrophysics into these singular expressions of color and light, vindicating Keats' famous couplet, "Beauty is truth, truth, beauty."
I remember when I read that article that my friend Ross Anderson wrote about the Hubble, and he says, here you have an instrument of man that allows us to mainline the whole of time through the optic nerve. I knew that I had to make a video of it because I just wanted to like somehow convey the feeling behind a statement like that. The fact that we can mainline space and time and using this instrument distill all of that and fit it into our optic nerve so that our brains can process something like that, that I think is an example of the sort of the strength, the power of the consciousness expanding power of technology. You know, I always tell people technology is psychedelic, and people immediately think, of course, of psychedelic drugs, LSD and whatnot, but like the definition of the word psychedelic means to manifest the mind. And what better example of manifesting the mind is there than our modern technology today? You know, cognitive philosophers refer to our smartphones as outsourced cognition. They refer to our smartphones as extensions of our minds. And I think that's increasingly what we are. I think if we get over our skin bag bias, if we drew the Vitruvian man today, he would have little labels pointing to his frontal lobe and his neocortex, his opposable thumb, and his iPhone would probably be considered a part of his anatomy. It doesn't have to be tethered to his tissue to be a part of who and what we are. And on that, I'd like to turn it to some questions for you guys so that you can tell me where you'd like to take the conversation for the next 20 minutes. We got some microphones up in the front. And yeah, thanks. Hi.
Thanks for these awesome videos. I'd be interested in learning more about what you think about so the Singularity Summit in New York you were at.
Yeah.
Lots of amazingly smart people in the room.
Yeah.
That are the source of all the things you're showing. But among them, there was also a handful that think that as a society, we should stop supporting people who have below, 100 and something of IQ. Just the same way we dropped supporting horses as in our society because they're not productive beings. I mean, now we're supporting them, but not really. So where do you see that? Like, so you're talking a lot about the mind. What about how we connect with the heart?
Well, I think if you see the style in which I communicate, I think it's all heart. I think that the power of aesthetics and the power of feeling doesn't escape me when it comes to how I portray ideas or how I explain ideas. Leonard Schlein, who wrote Art and Physics, talks about the fact that both of these worlds are just two sides of the same coin, and I think they're inescapable from one another. So I think that there's nothing more beautiful than to contemplate how we might extend our sphere of possibilities. I mean, every parent wants to tell his kids, dream bigger, dream the impossible. There's nothing we can't do. But what's wrong with adults thinking this way too? It doesn't just have to be children, you know what I'm saying? I mean, there's too much I see too much doom and gloom. I see a media where if it bleeds, it leads. I see a lot of cynicism. But except for when you go to TED. When you go to TED, I think you really enter a conversation where you have a lot of brilliant people speaking optimistically. I often point people to Steven Pinker's talk, The Myth of Violence. that showcases all the ways in which the world is getting less violent than ever before. The chances of a man dying at the hands of another man are the lowest than they've ever been. I point people to the work of Matt Ridley, whose TED Talk, When Ideas Have Sex, talks about the inexorable progress that society has made over the last 100 years. And even when we worry about the economics in this country, the global economy has grown at like 3 to 5% a year for the last 40 years. And for every like one person maybe here that falls out of the middle class, 4 or 5 enter the middle class around the rest of the world. So overall, you see this rise. Hans Rosling, who has this great website called Gapminder, showcases all the ways in which every nation in the world, by every measurable indicator, have been rising. So I see a lot of optimism, and I try to put a lot of heart into that message, at least through my videos, because I think everything's going to be okay.
Thank you.
Yes, next question? Questions? No questions? There's got to be a question. Come on, all right. Yeah, this guy right here, and then afterwards you.
So, Kurzweil and
Yeah.
the law of accelerated returns.
Yeah.
And the whole idea of, we're getting so fast and at the speed of thought able to realize new products into the world and all that.
Sure.
How do we know as we're doing this creation that it will be okay? How do we sort of let go,
Yeah.
trust that we're doing the right thing? Because it's
Yeah.
so hard to predict what we will do.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, and that's a very good question. Actually, Matt Ridley just published an article in the Wall Street Journal where he was saying that we don't really understand why this Moore's Law and this inexorable progress has been so consistent through wartime, through bubbles and through economic depressions and the progress is inexorable. And I know Kevin Kelly gets a little more esoteric, and he says that's because technology is an evolutionary force. It's a leap, from the moment that we invented language, biological evolution stopped being as relevant. We reverse engineered nature. We created this new force in nature called memes. We went from genes to memes, and memes replicate. And even though memes are not made of DNA, memes have transformed the world. Ideas shape the world. But I think that what he was saying is that we can take some kind of reassurance from knowing that even when things look like they're going to shit in one country or in the economy of the world, the progress continues. And he also says that the negative part is that even if we try to do all these policies to sort of accelerate progress, it's going to accelerate anyway. So it's like it's this thing that's just has a life of its own. Kevin Kelly calls it the technium. It's this kind of self-organizing principles that exist in the universe that led to multicellular organisms that were then caught in self-awareness, that then started the outgrowth of their own minds. Their minds started spilling over in the form of these artifacts. Artifact-based expansion seems to be the human condition. We create tools that extend our sphere of possibility and so on and so forth. But it goes full circle because now we're seeing like biomimicry. Now we're starting to create technology using biology. Now we're using biology as a programmable medium. And so what happens? Our technology first went that way, and now it's coming right back in, and now we're going to upgrade ourselves. So I think we should be, I don't know. I'm thinking beyond the infinite. Like I see no end to this, and I think that it's a whole system, right? Like even when the astronauts first saw Earth from the vantage point of space for the first time, and we sort of knew immediately that we needed a new story of who and what we were. The whole Earth catalog had that picture of the Earth on the cover, and it was like, let's systems thinking, cybernetics, everything is connected, and so on and so forth. And I think that when you see problems today, like global warming and whatnot, these are consequences of a system in expansion, and the system is going to have to be a self-repairing system if it wants to persist. Just like when we have a wound, we have a system of things, checks and balances that come and like heal the wound and this and that. And so I think if we think of the globe as a system, as a human technology system that's integrated, I think that we will address the things that are wrong with the system if we want to keep expanding, which I think we will. Question?
Jason, one thing that I think most people here at this conference have to deal with is a compactness of communication.
Sure.
A way of communicating efficiently, and especially when it comes to something like Twitter.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the power of metaphor that you've touched upon, in sync with poetry, about how metaphor can not only communicate but lead to insight and breakthrough?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I could offer an expert take on the power of metaphor, but I think for me it's one of those things where good communication, concise, visceral, powerful communication is something that you know it when you see it, or rather you know it when you feel it. Some of the people that I admire, you hear them talk, Terence McKenna, man. I mean, it's just like, where is he getting that script? I mean, the erudition that bursts forth from people like that just blows my mind. Carl Sagan, yes, he was an astronomer, but I think above all else, the guy was a poet. The guy was a wonder junkie, to coin his own term. He was a guy that was addicted to that state of wonder, to that state of awe, in which we sort of confirm that Gnostic suspicion that there is something greater to us than nature allows. Or as Joseph Campbell says, God is that which exceeds our intellectual capacity. But as a creature who increasingly wants to reverse engineer nature so that nothing is beyond our intellectual capacity, I think that we still, just because our science tends to be reductionist doesn't mean we don't still crave that feeling of awe. And so it's about, I think that the power of metaphor and communication is like, even though these ideas are breaking down the world into easily explainable bits, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't communicate these ideas in ways that are still transcendent. And of course, transcendent communications means that all the elements in the way you communicate something are greater than the sum of their parts. That the whole thing is greater than each individual part, right? So that's the notion of transcendence. So like me just saying something is not as powerful as me saying it with music and with imagery and with everything edited together in a way that is greater than the sum of its parts. And I think that's a powerful thing. Any other questions? Questions? No questions. Well, I have time maybe for one more video. How about that? Yes.
Buckminster Fuller, of course, is one of my favorites.
Oh, I love him.
He's very, very optimistic like you are. And
yeah.
From what I read, he was just as fascinating of a speaker as you are to listen to.
Aww.
But his work has been kind of looked down upon for its optimism, and people don't integrate it into the world because they think it's so far optimistic and far-fetched.
Yeah.
How do we take this awe that you create and make it practical in the little things that we do every day, and say how you market at Microsoft?
Yeah, well, interesting. Well, no, it's interesting because I get contacted by companies all the time for this stuff. I just actually hosted a whole event for IBM, their biggest conference on big data. It was 12,000 people for 4 days at an arena in Vegas, and it was all about how do we think about big data in a way that's awe-inspiring? How can we, use big data as a way to engineer serendipity? How can we make these smart systems respond to people in an increasingly powerful way? And I think that with Bucky Fuller, I don't know, my answer to that would be as Peter Diamandis likes to say, a breakthrough idea is a crazy idea before it becomes a breakthrough, and so I think that it's always been the case that we have to probe the adjacent possible and we have to push the boundaries of what's possible, and anything that transforms the world, before it transforms the world, it seems impossible. But I think that when we look upon the long view, I think it gives us a unique perspective that we should think in impossible terms. I don't know how many fabulous quotes you can find of experts saying that aviation was impossible. Man will never create a machine that flies, and so on and so forth, from like the people of the highest order. I love looking up historical quotes like that, where people cite the impossibility of something that will occur, and then of course it becomes not just something that occurs, but something that we don't even think about. We don't even give a second thought to. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm just trying to engage people and make them think differently, and hopefully it's like you create a butterfly effect, right? If you decondition thought, if you decondition people in a powerful enough way, that might inform how they approach a problem later on. In the 1960s, there's a great book called What the Dormouse Said, written by a New York Times writer, John Markoff. And that book talks about the marriage or the kind of interaction that occurred between the counterculture and the psychedelic culture of the 60s and the early computer culture that was happening in Silicon Valley and Xerox PARC and whatnot. There was a guy called Douglas Engelbart who was running the Xerox PARC, a place where they were doing these experiments. They were obsessed with augmenting human intelligence by any means necessary. And what they were doing is they were having all these engineers come with problems that they had been working on for months, with engineering problems that they were stuck on. And then they were giving them LSD, but of course you could think of LSD as just a metaphor for taking them out of their comfort zone, right? Taking them out and putting them in a different context and changing their perspective on how they approached a problem. And of course, some of the breakthroughs that came out of that are probably responsible for the world that we live in today. There's a lot of people that say that the internet and computers are the literalization of the psychedelic dream of everything is connected, superconnectivity and superconductivity. There's an article in Reality Sandwich says that Google is the first psychedelically informed superpower because its goals come straight out of the atlas of the psychedelic dream of wiring us all together. There's more than a little cybernetics in the idea of Buddhism, that we are all one. So it's a lot to think about. Any other questions? What time is it? 5 minutes. Okay, how about one more video? I know I have one here. So this video that I want to show you is I did for Peter Diamandis' new book on abundance. And you're going to hear some things I've already told you during my talk about the power of exponential growth. But this book is like, he's trying to do like a modern version of the Whole Earth Catalog. It stays away from the profound philosophy and it focuses on what can you do today that can improve the lives of 1 billion people. A lot of the work that they're doing at Singularity University is teaching executives and business leaders and entrepreneurs to think exponentially. Because when you start a company today, if you were to leverage the power of these emerging technologies that are coming online, you wouldn't be thinking, how am I going to make $1 million? You know, in the social network, they're like, oh, it's not about $1 million, it's about $1 billion. But I'm thinking, it's not about how can you create a product that can offer goods and services to 100,000 people, but it's more about what can I do that will improve the lives of 1 billion people? And I guess if we can all start thinking this way, we've never had such tools. Today, technologists can do what only governments could do mere decades ago. So I love the book so much, I just made a video that's basically a trailer for his book, a fanboy video, but he uses it at his talks now. But just one more for you as a bonus. Enjoy.
You know, I'm really excited about Peter Diamandis and Stephen Kotler's new book, Abundance. Right off the bat, they explain this idea that technology is a resource-liberating mechanism, and that scarcity is actually contextual. Something is only scarce until you develop the technology that turns it into something abundant. They introduced this concept of exponential technological progress, and to explain this, they talk about 30 steps. If you take 30 linear steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 30 steps later, you're at 30. If you take 30 exponential steps, 2, 4, 8, 16, 30 steps later, you're at 1 billion. That's the reason that the cell phone in your pocket today is 1 million times cheaper, 1 million times smaller, and 1,000 times more powerful than a $60 million supercomputer was in the 1960s. That's the billion-fold increase in price and performance and miniaturization. You know, a young person with a cell phone in Africa today has access to better communications technology than the US president did 25 years ago. So it's this concept of exponential growth, right? And then you have the rising billion around the world, people coming online for the first time, buying smartphones, joining the global conversation. You have a new generation of techno-philanthropists, you know, people that have made billions of dollars in the information age. They have the resources of nation states and they want to transform the world. You have DIY innovators, you know, leveraging emerging technologies to impact the world in a positive way. And so the book ends up being a kind of really optimistic take on a possible path that we can take. We can leverage these emerging technologies that are evolving exponentially, and we can transform the world. It's up to us, and abundance shows us how.
There you go, fanboy video. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you so much. Have a great day. And I'm at Jason Silva on Twitter. If you guys want to say hi that way, the silent, quiet way. Or come say hi over here. Thank you.